Welcome to another episode of Smash JT. A lot of people have been talking about this Metal Jesus Rocks video discussing a rare PS4 game called The Revenge of Bird King, and apparently it has something to do with limited run games, but not really, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But this situation seems very fishy. It seems shady, and while I don't want to point any fingers at limited run games or at Joe, the guy who is in charge of making this game, or Metal Jesus Rocks, I definitely want to at least inform you guys as to the facts that we have on the table regarding this situation and what may come from it in the future. So here we are with the story Revenge of the Bird King, a physical copy of a PlayStation 4 game that was printed in extremely limited quantities, supposedly, and is not available on the PS Digital storefront. So if you want to be able to play this game on the PlayStation 4, you need to buy the physical version. And oh, by the way, trophy hunters, you would need to get this game as well because there are trophies in it. And Metal Jesus Rocks talks about those as well in his video. Now, like I said, I don't want to point fingers at Jason for his video. It seemed innocent enough. He was simply informing people about the prospect of this game being available at Portland Retro Game Expo last weekend, and how people, if they're interested in it, there is a limited supply of them and it's something to be on the lookout for. And even Jason, Metal Jesus Rocks, came out saying had no idea how this video would blow up with negativity and frustration from gamers, because he thought he was just doing Joe a favor by getting the word out about this. So if you are to believe Jason on his word, you can't really say anything. If that's how he felt about this truly, okay. But the situation surrounding Revenge of the Bird King gets a lot more interesting the more you dig. Jason's video, he compares it to stadium events, which I think honestly is kind of a fair comparison, because stadium events was canceled when Nintendo was moving forward with the Power Pad and decided to make the game, rebrand it as World Class Track Meets. So the original Family Fitness Stadium Events game never really was supposed to go on sale, and it did in a few places, but for the most part it was removed and those copies were destroyed, and nobody knows how many of these are actually out there. The minimum print run on NES games back then was 10,000 copies. It is believed that Stadium Events is far less than that, especially after copies were supposedly destroyed. So he's likening the situation of Stadium Events to Revenge of the Bird King, because there was an event that was supposed to have this game go on sale and apparently have it released digitally that got canceled. And then Joe, the guy who made this game, bought these physically and was stuck with them. So now the game is not available to be purchased digitally on the PlayStation 4 storefront, so the game itself physically is not allowed to be sold because Sony requires you to have the game for sale digitally and physically if you're going to be selling it physically. You can't just sell a game physically without it available on the storefront, which makes sense. But where things get a little bit confusing with this entire situation is when Jason says this.
And then he goes on to tell me that he paid for a small batch of physical copies for this event as a promotion, but the event was canceled, and that means also that the digital version would automatically be canceled as well.
Okay, so this opens up a ton of questions regarding the game. What was the event that it was supposed to go on sale for, and what relation to the event had this game going for sale digitally? There's no information given in this video about that event, which makes it seem a little bit shady. Like, why would this game be attached to an event that would be selling it, that it would go for sale digitally? And when that event got canceled, apparently the PS storefront digital copy got canceled as well for some reason, but then the game got made anyways, and Joe, the guy that made this, is stuck with a bunch of copies of this. That's the story we've been given about it, But I've been doing a lot more digging and research on this to find out whatever information I could bring to you guys, because as far as this game is concerned, it should not exist. And whether you want to believe Jason or not for him saying he's doing his friend a favor and getting the word out about this game, he's really heavily pushing the trophy aspect of it in this video so that collectors would go out and get this game so that they can get their trophies for it. But the other way you can look at that is saying he's just trying to get people information about a game that is going to be hard to find. So I can see both sides of the story, and I am not blaming Metal Jesus Rocks for this, just saying the entire situation surrounding this, coming from Joe especially, the guy behind making the game, is extremely shady. Now, I reached out to Josh Fairhurst on Twitter to ask him for more information about this, and here's what he said. Revenge of the Bird King on PS4 is not published or distributed by us, so it's not affiliated with limited run games whatsoever, according to Josh. Joe pressed copies of his own game for personal distribution because we did not want to publish copies ourselves. We have zero involvement with Joe's physical release of his own game. Makes perfect sense. Limited Run Games doesn't have anything to do with this. The guy works for Limited Run Games. He's a developer. He can make these games and decided to publish it with his own company. Got it. Thank you for the clarification. Was curious in your and or Doug's professional stance on the situation. Based off what I know, if it were me, I'd be pretty pissed off that my company was being dragged into this light by an employee. And Josh said, Joe is not making any attempt to drag us into this. The conspiracy theorists are doing it on their own. I would argue with that because Mel Jesus Rock's video basically says that this is something to do with limited run games. He says it multiple times throughout the video, and he even talks about limited run games and how they started out making these games published in the first place. So he did make a distinction in his video, but it was very unclear. So I can see why people assumed this had something to do with limited run games. They also think John Hancock is somehow involved, and Joe hadn't even met the guy until 3 days ago. I hadn't heard anything about John Hancock being involved, but okay. They'll connect whatever dots they can to suit their narrative. Joe has been an independent game developer since long before we hired him, and I allow employees to continue pursuing their own things while under employment with me. Any registered developer with Sony can produce a physical run of their own game. Because we are trying to focus more on bigger titles, I didn't want to publish his game physically through limited run, and I especially do not now. So he ran the game physically himself. He didn't set out with ill intentions. Okay, so Joe was just making a game and wanted to get this game made physically. Got you. It's good to know. Do you happen to know how many copies he had printed? I feel like that's a really important aspect to the story. I know Sony had a minimum print run on games typically, but from the pics he's shown off, it seems like far less. And here's what I'm talking about from those pictures. This is far less than the minimum print run that Sony requires, which from what I said to Josh, he would have run the minimum. You can't go below that. He wouldn't have had the money to go beyond that. There's nothing stopping him from ordering more to meet whatever demand exists. I would 100% recommend people not give into any hype and buy the game at inflated prices. So Josh just wants this situation to go away. And I understand that from his perspective. It's kind of tarnishing limited run games, and apparently they have nothing to do with it, so it's probably pissing them off pretty good. From what I understand, the minimum print run is 1,000 copies from Sony. Solid advice. Thanks for the heads up. I appreciate it, Josh. You can clearly see this is not 1,000 copies of a game. It's like maybe 40? Maybe 50, depending on how thick the pile is underneath it, but not 1,000. So it's almost like Joe, who was wearing the limited run hat representing the company, but not selling these through the official means of limited run, is trying to make it look like this game is far more exclusive and a smaller print run than it really is. Don't know why he'd be doing that, except to maybe get more attention to the game to be able to sell it for higher prices. But that brings up a few more questions about this. Josh goes on to say, my 2 cents, you're free to make a video about this, but it's just going to further fuel hype and artificially inflate the value until Joe has solidified his plans to get the game out in a more accessible way. I would disagree with that, because people who maybe understand the background of this won't want anything to do with this game because it seems really shady. Everything around it Sounds like the guy could make more copies of it if he wants to, and the prices that it's selling at are already ridiculous anyways, and it's not even apparently an official PlayStation release, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Josh goes on to say it's literally not our release, and I have put in effort to help Joe move towards wider distribution. People can make whatever videos they want, but it will 100% artificially inflate the value and push people into buying something that is not worth anywhere near the asking price. And I said, what really confuses me is the whole licensing thing. Sony requires games to be available digitally as well. Did Joe jump the gun and have these printed prior to paying for the license to sell in the PS Store? Wouldn't that make these illegal to sell at that point? There are a lot of questions. And no response from Josh. He just kind of wanted to wash his hands from the situation and didn't want to talk any further. Anytime there's a question about this that digs deeper, nobody wants to answer it, which makes me wonder why. Why is it so hard to answer these questions? That is a pretty straightforward question about the licensing of the game. How this guy ended up with all these copies of a physical version, but shows it like he only has 40 copies, when in reality, he has a minimum of 1,000 when he started. That's bare minimum. That's the minimum print run Sony allows. And he's making it look like he has far less so that he can manipulate the price himself. Very interesting situation. If he showed a gigantic box of 1,000 of these, I don't think the demand would have been there from the get-go. So from this, I moved on to messaging Joe, because I wanted to find out from the source what the hell's going on with this game and why is it so shady in the background. And honestly, the answer left me with even more questions going into this, which makes me realize that the situation is a much deeper rabbit hole than most of us had even imagined in the first place. I hit Joe up saying, hey, do you have a minute? Researching information about Bird King for a video and wanted to make sure I give accurate information to my audience. What really confuses me is the whole licensing thing. Sony requires games to be available digitally as well. Did you jump the gun and have these printed prior to obtaining the license to sell on the PS Store? And he said, the game is licensed and approved digitally. The port was funded by an outside party to do a stupid, silly promo release for an event that has since been canceled. I have not gotten the rights to the PS4 port back, so I can't release it. Right there, it tells me a couple of really strange things. One, what the hell kind of stupid, silly promo release for an event would have a game connected to selling it on a store digitally? How is that connected to that? Very, very weird that because the event got canceled, apparently the sale for this game on the PS Store got canceled alongside that. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Not to mention, he said, I have not gotten the rights to the PS4 port back, so I can't release it. So he's saying he can't legally sell this game that he is selling through other means, and Limited Run Games is assisting him in illegally selling a game that he does not officially have the rights to be selling, if I understand correctly. Please correct me if I'm wrong here. I go on to say, thank you for the response. That's where a lot of people are getting hung up with this. What was the name of this event that was canceled, and how does that relate in turn to this being released digitally or not? A few minutes went by and he said, I am under an ongoing non-disclosure agreement and I can't say any more. No problem on the response, but due to the reaction and harassment, I'm not planning on talking about this any further for the time being. I hope you understand. I just wanted to clarify your first question. Which you really didn't. Your answer, Joe, confused me even more, which is why I followed up with, understood. I've heard some of the whispers from some of the interactions you've had to deal with surrounding the situation. I'm truly sorry to hear about that happening. People are sending like death threats and things like that to him about this whole complicated and confusing situation. No one should have to deal with the threats and aggression like that. I'm sure you already know that not answering any further questions will only open up further speculation for shadiness surrounding the situation. I don't mean to imply that your intention with this game was malicious in any way, but there are a lot of people wondering why a few simple questions to clear the air cannot be answered and move on from this. Namely, What the hell was the name of that event, that stupid silly promo event that got canceled, and why did that remove the release on the PlayStation Store, but yet you somehow got 1,000 copies of this game, even though you show yourself in bed with what amounts to about 40 of them. And then you see him saying, I have more copies, and I'll be selling them at the official Limited Run Games pop-up shop, November 23rd, which is, as of recording this, about 1 month from now, and he will be selling these apparently at the Limited Run sponsored event. Even though he doesn't have the rights to sell this game, he'll be selling it through an official means. Very strange. The entire situation is confusing. It's got a lot of collectors really frustrated and pissed off, and understandably so, because this game is, because it wasn't licensed by Sony, it's not available digitally on the PlayStation 4 store. It's available on the PSP, but not Sony's PS4 platform on the store. He had the copies of the game made, so you can play it, you can get the trophies, but only through the physical version that is not officially licensed by Sony. That's how I understand the situation, and that's why it's so strange to me. I don't want to say it's a scam. I don't want to say it's something that they're maliciously going after people. I just want to say it smells bad. It stinks. It's very, very weird. And because they're not answering the questions about it, just makes me even more confused as to what's going on behind the scenes with this. Why does he have 1,000 copies of this game? Why are they selling it through official means like limited run pop-up stores or at PRGE? What was the name of the event that got canceled? Why can't any of these questions get answered? It almost feels like it's just a story that's been manufactured in order to create an avenue to sell games through an unofficial means. That's where I'm going to leave this video. That's where we stand right now on it. Be very interested to see where this goes from here. But as of right now, all I'm left with is a ton of questions and concerns for everything surrounding this entire situation. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, you stay smashing.